Choose me or your God, Ava. I need you to choose. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the window and her own breathing. Ava stood in the middle of their bedroom, still in her coat, bag still on her shoulder, keys still in her hand, and looked at her husband and understood that something had just changed that she could not change back. Dae-hyun stood by the window. He hadn't raised his voice. He never raised his voice. That was the thing about him that people who didn't know him missed entirely. He was most dangerous when he was most still, and right now he was completely, terrifyingly still. "What did you just say to me?" she said. It wasn't a question. He heard that. "My mother called today." He said it simply, without apology. "She wants the child raised in the Choi tradition, no exceptions. I told her I would speak to you." And there it was. 3 days of tenderness, 3 days of hands held over dinner and a future that felt suddenly possible and entirely theirs. 3 days, and one phone call from his mother had ended all of it. "So she called," Ava said carefully, "and you decided tonight was the night to ask me to choose." "I'm not asking you to stop believing." His voice was measured. The voice he used when he had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I'm asking what kind of home we're building. What kind of life? You've known me for 4 years, Dae-hyun. You knew exactly who I was when you married me. I know who you are." He turned from the window and looked at her directly. "I'm asking who our child will be." The word child landed between them like something physical. They had found out 3 days ago, and now this. "Our child," Ava said slowly, "will know God. That was never a negotiation." Something moved across his face, not anger, worse than anger, certainty. "My family." "Don't." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him completely. "Don't. Finish that sentence with your family, Dae-hyun. This is our marriage. Our child. Your family does not get a vote on what I pass down to my own baby." The silence that followed was the longest of their marriage. He looked at her with that composed, unreadable surface she had spent 3 years learning to see beneath. Tonight, she couldn't find anything beneath it. Tonight, it went all the way down. "I'm not asking you to stop believing," he said again. "I'm asking you to think about what we're building here, in this country, in this family. There are things that matter here that you still don't fully understand. Then help me understand them." She took a step toward him. "Talk to me. That's all I've ever asked. Just talk to me instead of managing me." He was quiet. "But you won't," she said, "because talking means admitting that this was always the problem, that you have been waiting for me to become someone more convenient, and I have been waiting for you to accept who I actually am." She watched him absorb that, watched him decide in real time whether to open or close. He closed. "I just need you to think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Ava picked up her bag from the floor. She walked to the bathroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bathtub and turned the faucet on so he wouldn't hear her. She sat there until the water ran cold against her hand. Then she turned it off, dried her hands, stood up slowly, the way a person does when they are being careful with themselves, and walked back out. The bedroom was dark. Dae-hyun was on his side of the bed, with his back to her, his breathing the slow, even rhythm of a man who was either asleep or needed her to believe he was. She stood in the doorway and looked at the shape of him. This man she loved, this man she had followed to the other side of the world, this man who had just asked her to choose. She crossed the room, got into bed, lay on her back in the dark and placed her hand flat on her stomach. She did not pray. The impulse was there, that anchoring reflex that had carried her through every hard thing her life had handed her. But something heavy was sitting on top of it, something she didn't have the energy to move tonight. She was still lying there when she felt his hand find hers in the dark, slow, careful, as if he wasn't sure she would allow it. She didn't pull away. She didn't move toward him either. She lay there with his hand over hers, and the rain still falling, and the weight of everything unsaid filling the room like water, and beneath all of it, that small, quiet life that belonged to both of them, entirely unaware of the storm it had started. In the morning she woke to an empty bed and the sound of the front door already closed. She found his note on the kitchen counter. 4 words in his careful handwriting. "We'll talk later. D." She read it once, set it down, and stood there in the silence of an apartment that suddenly felt like it belonged more to his absence than to either of them. Simone called at 8:47 in the morning, which meant she already knew something was wrong, not about the ultimatum. Ava hadn't told anyone about that. Not about the pregnancy either. But Simone had a particular radar for Ava's silences, had been calibrated to them since they were 19 years old, sharing an apartment in Atlanta, and apparently 3 years and 9,000 miles had done nothing to dull it. "You sound flat," Simone said, skipping hello entirely. "Good morning to you too." Ava. "I'm fine, Simone." A pause, then, "Where's Dae-hyun?" "Work. It's Saturday." Ava looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall and discovered that it was, in fact, Saturday. She had lost an entire day somewhere inside the previous 48 hours and hadn't noticed until just now. He had something to handle. Simone's was a fully developed language. This particular one meant, "I don't believe you, but I'm giving you space to lie for another 60 seconds. Ava sat down at the kitchen table. Outside the window, Sol was doing what Sol did on Saturday mornings, moving efficiently, purposefully, without particular interest in anyone's private devastation. She watched a woman cross the street below with 2 children and a bag of groceries, and felt something pull in her chest that she couldn't name. "I'm pregnant," she said. The silence on Simone's end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, "Say that again." "You heard me. Ava Michelle Washington." Simone's voice had shifted into that register that meant she was simultaneously overjoyed and preparing to ask 17 questions. "How long? Are you okay? Does Dae-hyun? Wait, is that why you sound flat?" Ava was quiet for a moment. She watched the woman with the groceries disappear around a corner. "We found out 3 days ago. And we had a conversation last night that didn't go the way I needed it to go." She heard Simone processing this carefully, which was unusual for Simone, who processed most things at full volume. "What kind of conversation?" Ava opened her mouth, then closed it. The full shape of what Dae-hyun had said was right there. She could hand it to Simone, and Simone would know exactly what to do with it, would be furious on her behalf with a completeness and efficiency that Ava genuinely envied right now. But something stopped her. The same something that had made her turn the faucet on last night, so he wouldn't hear her cry. She wasn't ready for it to exist outside the apartment yet. Once she told Simone, it would become a real and spoken thing that other people had opinions about, and right now it still felt like something that belonged only to her and Dae-hyun, and whatever they were going to do with it. "We disagreed about some things," she said finally, "about how we want to raise the baby." "What kinds of things?" "Faith, tradition, the usual." "The usual." Simone repeated this with a flatness that communicated everything she was choosing not to say. "Ava, look me in the eye through this phone and tell me you're okay." "I'm okay." "Are you praying?" The question landed quietly and with precision. Ava looked at the Bible on the counter where she had moved it this morning. She hadn't opened it, but she had moved it from the bedroom to the kitchen, which felt like something. A small renegotiation with herself. "I'm getting there," she said. Dae-hyun came home at 2 in the afternoon. She heard his key, heard the particular weight of his footsteps that told her he was tired, and stayed where she was at the kitchen table with her tea and her unopened Bible, and the phone face down in front of her. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had brought food again, a different place this time, further from his office, which meant he had gone out of his way. She noticed this and wasn't sure yet what to do with it. "You didn't eat," he said, looking at the untouched counter. I had tea. He set the food down and sat across from her without being invited, which was either intimacy or presumption, and she couldn't decide which. He looked at her with that careful, composed attention that she had once found steadying and today found exhausting. I've been thinking, he said. About which part? He was quiet for a moment. All of it. He looked at the Bible on the counter, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a loosening at the edges. I said it badly last night. You said it clearly, Ava told him. That's different from saying it badly. He absorbed that. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I know you believe that. She folded her hands on the table. That's actually the part that worries me most. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw it again. That brief, unguarded thing that lived beneath all the composure, the thing that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. It moved across his face and then was gone, managed back into stillness before it could cost him anything. My mother wants to meet, he said. This week, for dinner. Ava felt the shift in the room as clearly as a change in temperature. Does she know about the baby? She asked. Yes. So his mother had known before Ava had told her own. She thought about her mother in Atlanta, who still didn't know. Who would have wanted to be the first call, the first voice, the first person to pray over this news with her daughter? That was not a small thing. And Dae-hyun knew it wasn't a small thing, which meant he had told his mother anyway and decided the consequences were manageable. This week, she said finally. Not a question, not agreement. Just the words, returned to him exactly as he had delivered them. Thursday, he said. Fine. She reached across the table and opened her Bible to no page in particular. Just opened it, let it fall where it fell, and looked down at the words without reading them. It was the first time she had touched it since the night before. Dae-hyun watched her do this and said nothing. But he didn't leave the table either. He sat with his hands folded and watched her the way he sometimes watched rooms he wasn't sure he controlled yet, quietly, patiently, as if the answer to something was in there if he waited long enough to find it. She felt it and said nothing, just let the page hold her eyes and the silence hold them both. Hello and welcome to Afro-Korean Series channel. Enjoying this story? You're welcome to subscribe for more. Thanks for listening. The Choi family home was not what Ava had expected the first time she saw it, and it was not what she expected now. It was understated in the way that very old money is understated. Everything quality, nothing loud, the kind of home that didn't need to announce itself because everyone who mattered already knew. She had learned early that this was how the Choi family operated across the board. Nothing announced, everything understood. Dae-hyun's mother, Choi Yeon-ja, was already seated when they arrived. This was deliberate. Ava had learned that too. She was a small woman who occupied space with the efficiency of someone who had never needed physical size to make a room aware of her. She was dressed simply, hair immaculate, hands folded on the table in a way that managed to look both welcoming and administrative. She looked at Ava the way she always looked at Ava, with a warmth so precisely set it contained its own distance. Ava. She said it like a complete sentence. Eomeonim. Ava bowed slightly, the Korean coming automatically after 3 years of careful practice. She watched Yeon-ja register this and file it away without expression. They sat. Tea was poured. Small talk was made with the efficiency of people who had agreed in advance that small talk was necessary and had allocated exactly enough time for it. Dae-hyun sat between them and said very little, which told Ava that he had positioned himself as a witness tonight rather than a participant. She noted this and set it aside for later. Once, early in the dinner, Yeon-ja made a comment about the neighborhood. Something about how certain areas of Seoul were better for raising children, more stable, more familiar. It was casual, informational. Dae-hyun responded with a single word of agreement and then glanced at Ava in a way that lasted less than a second.
She caught it anyway. It was the glance of a man who knew exactly what his mother was doing and had decided tonight that knowing was,
as far as his involvement went. She filed that away too. It was Yonja who moved things forward as it always was. "You must be feeling well," she said to Ava. "The early months can be difficult." "I'm feeling fine, thank you." "Good." A pause, delicate and intentional. A healthy mother makes a healthy child. Everything else can be managed around that. Everything else. Ava heard the architecture of those two words and kept her face even. "I agree completely," Yonja smiled. "Dae-hyun tells me you have strong feelings about the baby's upbringing." "Dae-hyun and I are still discussing it," Ava said. She felt Dae-hyun go still beside her. As married people do. "Of course." Yonja lifted her teacup. "I only mention it because I think, as someone who has raised a child in this country, in this family, there are practical considerations worth understanding. It is not a small thing, raising a child between two cultures. The child will have questions about who they are, where they belong." She set the cup down. "It helps to have clarity from the beginning." "I have clarity," Ava said. The temperature in the room shifted by several degrees. Yonja looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite displeasure, something more measured than either. Something that recognized, perhaps for the first time, that Ava was not going to be managed tonight. "I'm sure you do," Yeonja said pleasantly. "My child will know both cultures," Ava continued, her voice even and unhurried. "Both languages, both histories. And my child will know my faith, not as something foreign or inconvenient, but as something that has carried this family for generations. That is not a negotiation. It is simply what is." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when something true has been said in a room full of people who preferred things unsaid. Dae-hyun set down his chopsticks. Yonja looked at her son for a long moment, then back at Ava. And then something happened that Ava did not expect. The older woman's expression shifted, not into warmth, not into concession, but into a kind of recognition, as if she was seeing Ava clearly for the first time and was deciding in real time what to do with what she found. "You love my son," Yeonja said. It was not a question. "Yes," Ava said, "I do." "And he loves you." Another pause. "That is not nothing. In this family, that is actually quite a lot." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement Yeonja had ever offered her. Ava received it without softening, without leaning into it. She simply nodded once and let it stand for what it was, partial, qualified, and real. In the car on the way home, Dae-hyun drove in silence for several minutes. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime efficiency, all lit glass and purposeful motion. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "Do what?" "Draw a line like that, in front of her." Ava turned to look at his profile. "I drew a line like that in front of you 3 days ago, and you asked me to think about it. Did you expect me to say something different to your mother?" He was quiet. "I wasn't disrespectful," she said. "I was clear. Those are different things. In my family, they're the same thing." "I know." She turned back to the window. "That's something you're going to have to work out, Dae-hyun, because I am not going to spend the rest of my life being unclear so that your family can stay comfortable." He didn't respond. But his jaw tightened in that way it did when something had landed that he couldn't argue with and wasn't ready to accept. They drove the rest of the way in silence. But it was a different silence than the night before. Less like water filling a room and more like two people standing on opposite sides of something, finally able to see each other clearly across it. When they got home, he held the door open for her without a word. She walked through it without thanking him. Inside the apartment, she set her bag down and stood in the hallway for a moment. The rooms were quiet. The city hummed distantly behind the windows. She felt the evening settling into her body, the way difficult things do. Not as drama, but as weight, accumulated, specific, hers to carry. She went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since the night of the ultimatum, she bowed her head and prayed. Not long, not elaborate, just the simple, anchoring return of a woman finding her way back to the truest thing she knew. When she opened her eyes, Dae-hyun was standing in the doorway watching her. She met his gaze and held it. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked away first. The call came on a Tuesday. Dae-hyun was in a meeting when his phone lit up with his father's name, not a common occurrence. His father, Choi Sung-jin, did not call during business hours. He did not call during personal hours either, not without a reason that had been arranged in advance. A spontaneous call from Choi Sung-jin meant something had been decided, and Dae-hyun was the last to know. He excused himself. "Your mother spoke to me," his father said, without greeting. "About the situation." The situation. Dae-hyun stood in the corridor outside the conference room and watched his own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window opposite. 34th floor. Seoul spread out behind his reflection like something he owned. "I'm handling it." "She doesn't think so." "With respect, it's my marriage." A pause. His father's pauses were not like his mother's. They were not tactical. They were simply the natural rhythm of a man who had never needed to rush anything, because everything had always waited for him. "She is a good woman. Your wife. I want you to know I have said this to your mother." Dae-hyun was quiet. "But good is not the same as suitable," his father continued, "and suitable is not the same as simple. You chose a complicated life, Dae-hyun. I am not criticizing. I am reminding you that complicated lives require decisions that simple lives do not." "What kind of decision are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything." Another pause. "I'm telling you that your mother will not let this rest, and when your mother does not let something rest, it has a way of becoming everyone's problem. You know this." Dae-hyun knew this. "Handle it," his father said, and ended the call. Handle it. 2 words that had governed every difficult thing in his family for as long as he could remember. Disagreements handled. Expectations handled. People handled. He had watched his father apply those 2 words to his mother's unhappiness, to his brother's failed business, to the cousin whose life choices had required 3 family meetings and a careful restructuring of the holiday schedule. He had never expected to hear them applied to his wife. He stood there a moment longer. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back into the meeting and said nothing to anyone. But something had shifted in him that he couldn't shift back. He came home that evening to find Ava on the living room floor, surrounded by what appeared to be the entire contents of a large shipping box from Atlanta. He almost didn't see her at first. He saw the box, the scattered contents, the blanket in gold and green spread across the floor, like something that belonged in a different home, in a different country. And then he saw the small Bible in her hands and her face, and understood that she had been sitting there for a while, with something that had undone her quietly and completely. The kind of undone that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with love, traveling 9,000 miles to find you on the wrong kind of day. Ava looked up when he came in. Her eyes were red, but her face was composed. "My mother sent things for the baby," she said. He set his bag down and came into the room and crouched down beside her, without being asked. He picked up the small Bible carefully. The cover had a name written inside in faded ink, Ruth Elaine Washington. Her grandmother. He had heard about Ruth Elaine Washington enough times to feel he almost knew her. "She passed before I moved here," Ava said, watching him hold it. "I never thought my mother would send this." He turned it over in his hands. It was light, worn smooth in the places where someone had held it daily for decades. He thought about his own grandmother, her particular silence, her particular expectations, the particular weight of everything she had represented to his family. He thought about legacy and what it meant to carry something forward. He set the Bible down gently between them. "I called my father today," he said. "Or rather, he called me." Ava was still. He told me to handle the situation. He looked at her directly. That's what he called it, the situation. She said nothing, just watched him. I've been using that language, he said. Not out loud, but in my head. The situation. As if your faith is something that happened to our marriage rather than something that was always part of you. He paused. I don't know when I started thinking that way, but I heard it in my father's voice today, and I recognized it, and I didn't like it. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in 4 days. Ava looked at him for a long moment. He could see her deciding how much to trust it. This admission, this moment, this version of him sitting on their living room floor, holding his position carefully between his hands. I appreciate you saying that, she said finally. I do. A pause. But Dae-hyun, saying, you don't like something is not the same as changing it. I know. I need to know what you're going to do. Not what you recognize, not what you don't like. What you are actually going to do. Her voice was even and direct and completely without cruelty. Because I have a baby coming, and I need to know what kind of man is going to be in that room with me. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at Ruth Elaine Washington's Bible on the floor between them, worn smooth by daily faithfulness, and felt the full weight of the question settle on him. I don't have that answer yet, he said. I know, Ava said quietly. That's what worries me. She began carefully repacking the box. He stayed where he was and watched her hands move. Careful, deliberate, the way she did everything, and understood that she was not waiting for him anymore, that she had made her own peace with who she was while he was still figuring out who he wanted to be. He reached over and picked up the framed verse from the floor and handed it to her without a word. She took it. Their fingers touched briefly in the exchange. Neither of them acknowledged it, but neither of them pulled away. She called her mother on a Wednesday morning while Dae-hyun was at work. Not because she had planned to. She had picked up the phone to check the time, and her mother's name was just there, the way it always was, sitting at the top of her recent calls like a quiet invitation. She pressed it before she could think about whether she was ready. Her mother answered on the second ring. Baby. Just that. One word in that particular voice that had been locating Ava Washington in the world since she was born. Ava sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, the way she used to sit on the kitchen floor at home in Atlanta when she was a teenager and the world had gotten too large for chairs. Hi, Mama. I've been waiting, her mother said. Not accusatory, just true. I know. The Bible got there? Yes. Ava closed her eyes. Mama, why did you send Grandma Ruth's Bible? A pause. Because I had a feeling you needed something that had already survived something. Her mother's voice was unhurried, the way it always was, the way Ava had spent years trying to learn. You want to tell me what's happening over there? And Ava told her. Not everything, not the rawest parts, not the bathroom floor, not the faucet she had turned on so her husband wouldn't hear her cry. But enough. The ultimatum, the dinner, the box arriving at precisely the wrong and right moment. She told it quietly and without drama, and her mother listened the way she always listened, completely, without interruption, without the urge to fix before the story was finished. When Ava was done, there was a silence that felt like arms. He said that to you, her mother said finally. Choose. Yes. And what did you say? I said my child will know God, that it wasn't a negotiation. Another silence. Then, good. Simple and complete. Now, what are you going to do about the man? Ava almost laughed. I don't know yet. Yes, you do, her mother said. You've known since, before you called me. You just needed to hear yourself say it out loud to someone who already knows who you are. A pause. So say it. She sat on the kitchen floor for a little while after she hung up, not crying, just sitting with the particular quiet of having said a true thing out loud to someone who received it without flinching. Outside the window, Seoul moved through its afternoon without her, and she let it. She placed her hand on her stomach and felt the city and the silence and the small life beneath her palm, and thought, for the first time since the night of the ultimatum, that she was going to be all right, not because anything had been resolved, just because she knew with complete certainty who she was. She got up off the floor, put the kettle on, and waited. Dae-hyun came home that evening to find the apartment different. He couldn't immediately identify what had changed. The rooms were the same, the furniture was the same. Ava was at the kitchen table, with tea and her Bible open in front of her. Actually open, actually being read, not just touched. But something in the quality of the air had shifted. Something had been decided. She looked up when he came in. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat. She closed the Bible and folded her hands on top of it, and looked at him with an expression he had not seen before. Not anger, not hurt, not the careful composure she wore when she was protecting herself from him. Something clearer than all of those, something that had been through something and come out the other side still standing. "I love you," she said. "I want to be very clear about that before I say anything else. I love you, and I want this marriage, and I want this family. That is not in question." He was very still. "But I need to tell you what I will not do." Her voice was even, unhurried. Her mother's voice, almost. "I will not raise my child in silence about who we are. I will not sit at your mother's table and perform smallness so that everyone can be comfortable. I will not go to bed another night wondering whether the man beside me sees my faith as a problem to be solved or a part of me to be loved." She paused. "I have been unclear about this for 3 years, because I loved you and I wanted things to work, and I kept believing that if I was patient enough and careful enough and good enough, you would simply come to understand. But I am done being unclear, Dae-hyun. I am done making myself small enough to fit into spaces that were never built for me." The kitchen was completely quiet. "I am not asking you to become someone you are not," she continued. "I am not asking you to walk away from your family or your culture, or anything that is true about who you are. I am asking you to extend me the same courtesy, to choose me, all of me, the way you asked me to choose you." She looked at him directly. "That is what I need. Not tomorrow, not when it becomes convenient, now." Dae-hyun sat with that for a long moment. She watched him the way she had learned to watch him, past the composure, past the surface, into whatever was working underneath. And what she saw this time was different from anything she had seen before. Not calculation, not management, something stripped of all of that. Something that looked like a man finally understanding the actual cost of what he had been asking. "You said you've been patient for 3 years, he said quietly. "I didn't know you were counting. I didn't know it cost that much." A pause. "I hear you. I know you hear me." She held his gaze. "I need to know if you're listening." He looked at her hands on the Bible. Ruth Elaine Washington's Bible, worn smooth by a woman who had carried it through harder things than this. Then he looked at Ava. Really looked at her, the way he had looked at her across a conference room years ago, when he had thought, "I want to know that person." And something in his face did what it almost never did in any room that mattered to him. It opened. "I've been afraid," he said, not as an excuse, just as a fact being placed on the table between them. "Of what it costs, of what my family thinks, of what it means to build something that doesn't look like anything I was taught to build." He paused. "I have been handling you like a situation, and you deserved better than that from the beginning." The silence that followed was not the heavy, waterlogged silence of the past 4 days. It was something thinner, cleaner, the silence of 2 people who had finally stopped talking around the true thing and said it. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she slid Ruth Elaine Washington's Bible across the table toward him, not as a challenge, not as a test, just as an offering, the most essential thing she had, extended across the space between them. He looked at it, then at her. He reached out and placed his hand over it. 3 weeks after the night of the ultimatum, Dae-hyun Choi walked into a church for the first time in 11 years. It was not a grand gesture. He had not announced it. He had not asked permission, or prepared a speech, or told his mother, or consulted his father. He had simply appeared in the kitchen on Sunday morning while Ava was getting ready, and said quietly, "I'd like to come with you, if that's all right." Ava had looked at him for a long moment. He was wearing a simple dark sweater and slacks, not dressed for a board meeting, not dressed for a family dinner, just dressed, just himself. She had searched his face for the performance of it, for the management of it, for the careful calculation she had learned to recognize underneath his gestures. She hadn't found it. "It's all right," she said. The church was a small international congregation in Mapogu that Ava had been attending for 2 years. It was not impressive in the way the Choi family understood impressive. No grand architecture, no particular prestige, no one in the room whose name carried weight in the circles that mattered to Sung Jin and Yeon Ja. It was just a room full of people who had travelled far from home and found something here that made the distance bearable. Dae Hyun sat beside her in the 3rd row and was quiet through everything. He was quiet through the singing, which surprised her. She had half expected him to be visibly uncomfortable, to hold himself slightly apart from it, the way he held himself apart from things he hadn't yet categorized. Instead, he sat with his hands on his knees and listened with the focused attention he gave to things he was genuinely trying to understand. He was quiet through the reading, quiet through the sermon, which was about faithfulness in small things, the daily return to what matters, the ordinary courage of showing up, and which Ava could not listen to without feeling it land directly on the past 3 weeks of her life. At one point, she felt his hand find hers on the seat between them. She looked down at their joined hands, and then at him. He was looking straight ahead, but his hand was certain around hers, not tentative, not performing, just there. She looked straight ahead too. Afterward, in the small courtyard outside where people gathered with coffee and conversation, Ava introduced him simply, "My husband, Dae Hyun," and watched him navigate something he had no template for. He shook hands. He answered questions about himself with more openness than she had ever seen him offer strangers. An older Ghanaian woman named Abena, who had attended the church for as long as Ava had been coming, pulled him into a conversation about Seoul neighborhoods that lasted 15 minutes and ended with Abena patting his arm and saying something in Korean that made him laugh. Actually laugh, unguarded and complete. Ava stood a few feet away and watched this and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. Later, on the walk home, he was quiet for a while in the way she had learned to read as processing rather than withdrawal. "The sermon," he said finally. "What about it?" "The daily return to what matters." He was looking at the pavement ahead of them. "I kept thinking about my grandmother. She had a phrase she used, haru haru chungsil hage, daily faithfulness. I hadn't thought about that in years." He paused. "I didn't realize until today that you have been practicing the same thing, that you have been doing that every day since you came here, in a place that didn't make it easy." Ava was quiet. "I made it harder," he said. "I added to the difficulty of something that was already difficult, and I called it concern for our family." He stopped walking and turned to look at her. "I'm sorry, Ava. Not for the version of sorry that asks you to move on quickly, the real kind. The kind that knows it has something to actually repair." She looked at him on the pavement outside their building. This man she had followed across the world. This man who had asked her to choose. This man who had walked into a room that had nothing to do with his comfort, or his family's approval, or his management of anything, and sat beside her and reached for her hand. "I know," she said. "I believe you. That's not the same as forgiving me." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But it's where I am right now, and it's honest." She held his gaze. "I don't need you to be perfect, Dae Hyun. I need you to keep showing up, like today. Just keep showing up." He nodded once, slowly.
The way he nodded when something had settled in him, rather than when he was simply acknowledging a point. That evening, they sat together on the living room floor, the same floor where the box from Atlanta had arrived, where Ruth Elaine Washington's Bible had been unpacked and held and set between them. Ava had made tea. The Bible was on the coffee table. The blanket her mother had sent was around her shoulders. Dae-hyun picked up the Bible and turned it over in his hands, the way he had the first time, carefully, as if he understood now what he was holding. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your grandmother." Ava looked at him. "Ruth Elaine," he said. "Tell me who she was." And so she did. She told him about a woman who had raised 5 children in a small house in Georgia, with a faith so constant and unperforming that it had simply become the weather of the household, present, reliable, the thing you planned around without thinking. She told him about Sunday mornings and the particular smell of her grandmother's kitchen, and the way Ruth Elaine had a habit of reading scripture quietly to herself while she cooked, not loudly, just beneath her breath, as if she was having a private conversation that happened to include everyone in the room. Dae-hyun listened the way he had listened in church. Completely, without interruption, without the urge to categorize or manage. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I want our child to know this," he said. "What you just told me. I want that to be part of what we give them." He set the Bible down gently on the cushion between them. "Both of what we give them. My grandmother's Haru Haru Chungsil Hage, and your grandmother's kitchen and everything in between." He looked at her. "I don't know how to build that yet, but I want to, if you'll let me try." Ava looked at the Bible between them, at his hands, at the man who had walked into a room that cost him something today and had not made her thank him for it. She reached over and took his hand, not as forgiveness completed, not as a problem resolved, just as a woman choosing, in full knowledge of everything, to stay in the work of loving someone who was finally, slowly, imperfectly, honestly, choosing her back. Ruth Elaine Washington's Bible sat between them on the cushion. And this time, neither of them moved it. And that's the start of another chapter of Ava and Dae-hyun's life. Thanks for staying to the end. I'd love to know what you felt about this story.